just like taking the talking points of the players and having I mean, I think business model that reflects that.
We can highlight very quickly and easily is whatever is paying you the most is what you're going to talk nice about.
Whatever's paying them the most is what they're going to talk nice.
Whatever is paying you the most is what you're going to talk nice about. Sue Bird just said that out loud. Not in some private conversation, not off the record, on her own podcast, calling out WNBA players for exactly what everyone's been thinking but nobody wanted to say. And she didn't stop there. She went after the Unrivaled founders directly, used the words rival leagues, and basically admitted there's a massive conflict of interest happening right now, while the WNBA is trying to negotiate its most important CBA in league history. This isn't speculation. This is Sue Bird, four-time champion, league legend, essentially confirming that player loyalty in the WNBA is completely transactional. And the timing? Jewel Lloyd just signed with Project B. Nneka Ogwumike, the actual president of the Players Association, signed while she's supposed to be negotiating for WNBA players. Jonquel Jones signed. Kelsey Mitchell's announcement is coming any day now. So the question becomes, what does loyalty even mean anymore when the people negotiating your league's future are also building competing leagues?
Obviously is involved in it. She's the president of the WNBPA. I always have to say that slow. 3 of its vice presidents, Stewie, Fee, Kelsey Plum, are all involved in Unrivaled. Obviously, Fee and Stewie, the co-founders in these rival leagues. What does that mean for the path forward?
The founders, hold on, you gotta hear that again. You gotta hear that.
Watch that reaction again.
Sue Bird knows this is messy. You can see it in her face. She's trying to be diplomatic, trying not to throw anyone under the bus directly. But she can't hide what she really thinks. That headshake when the question comes up about CBA negotiations, that's not confidence, that's concern. Here's the context everyone needs to understand. The WNBA's current collective bargaining agreement expires after the 2025 season. Right now, in December 2024, the Players Association should be laser-focused on negotiating the best possible deal for WNBA players. This is the moment. Viewership exploded in 2024, thanks to Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, and the rookie class. The league has leverage it's never had before. Sponsors are paying attention. Networks are competing for broadcast rights. This is when you strike. But instead, 3 of the Players Association's 4 vice presidents are running Unrivaled. Breanna, Stewart, and Napheesa Collier are co-founders. Kelsey Plum is heavily involved. And Nneka Ogwumike, the actual president of the union, just became one of Project B's highest-profile signings. Think about that structure for a second. The people who are supposed to be fighting for better WNBA contracts are simultaneously building a league that competes with the WNBA for players, attention, and sponsorship dollars.
The founders of, she said it, rival leagues. Rival. They are the co-founders of rival leagues, but they are on the board for the WNBPA. Can I get a conflict of interest for 100? Going for 100. Sold. Conflict of interest, man.
Stewie, Fee, Kelsey Plum are all involved in Unrivaled. Obviously, Fee and Stewie, the co-founders in these rival leagues.
Rival leagues. She said it herself. Not complimentary leagues, not off-season opportunities. Rival leagues. That's the most honest assessment anyone close to this situation has given publicly. Because here's what rivalry means in professional sports. Competition for resources. Competition for attention. Competition for the best players. Competition for media coverage. Competition for sponsorship dollars. You can't serve 2 masters when those masters are competing for the same limited pool of money. And Sue Bird's trying to soften it. Trying to say, well, when the WNBA is healthy, everything else benefits from that. But does anyone actually believe Unrivaled and Project B are sitting around hoping the WNBA negotiates a massive CBA that pays players so much they don't need alternative leagues? That's not how business works. These leagues exist because WNBA salaries have been low. If WNBA salaries suddenly jumped to where players were making legitimate money, say $500,000 average salaries, instead of $120,000, would Unrivaled even be necessary? Would Project B have the same appeal? The conflict is obvious. If you're a co-founder of Unrivaled, you need the WNBA to stay limited enough that your league remains attractive. You need that gap to exist. You need players to feel like they're not getting enough from the WNBA, so they'll commit to your alternative. That's not conspiracy theory. That's basic market dynamic.
Of interest comes up. But I have to, I mean, like, I'll speak from my own
conflict of interest. Is she bruh? Sue Bird does not want to be the one to like throw these players under the bus, but she clearly understands and knows this is a conflict of interest, dog. She knows this.
perspective, my own opinion. I'm not obviously speaking for, in this case, it would be Nneka, AT, Stewie, or Fee.
Yeah.
But I just think when the WNBA is healthy and successful, everything else like funnels from that. And I think that part of it sometimes gets lost in these conversations.
Now she's defending the WNBA's non-salary benefits. And this is where it gets interesting. She's right that playing in America matters. She's right that endorsement deals often require WNBA participation. She's right that playing in against the best competition in front of American audiences is what builds your brand. All of that is true, but notice what she's not saying. She's not saying WNBA salaries are fair. She's not saying players shouldn't explore other options. She's essentially arguing that the WNBA is valuable, despite its salary limitations, which is a very different argument than the WNBA pays players what they deserve. And this is the core tension. Sue Bird played in Russia for years. She made more money overseas than she ever made in the WNBA. She's not anti-player when it comes to getting paid. But what she's identifying here is something more subtle. These players who spent years positioning themselves as activists, as leaders fighting for equity and fair treatment, are now showing that all of that rhetoric disappears the moment someone offers them more money. And she's specifically calling out the hypocrisy of players who were vocal about WNBA issues, suddenly going silent because Project B or Unrivaled is cutting bigger checks.
The money talks and people follow the money, absolutely. But the WNBA, even though it's lacked, and I'm the first to tell you, it's lacked in salary for a lot of years.
Yeah.
It hasn't lacked in some other things. And I think
agree.
when players, I know you asked about the negotiations, but just to kind of take it wherever I'm going, I think what sometimes gets lost in this conversation when people talk about, what's this player going to do? Or what would that player do? Or what would you do? What's your number to go to this place? Or why would you play here? What gets lost when it comes to the WNBA is playing in America.
Yeah.
Russia, Turkey, China. WNBA players have been going overseas for decades, playing in leagues with questionable labor practices, authoritarian governments, and zero media coverage, all because the money was better. And Sue Bird's point is valid. Nobody criticized players for that. Everyone understood it. It was a financial necessity. So why is Project B or Unrivaled different? Here's why. Those overseas leagues weren't competing with the WNBA for relevance. They weren't happening during the WNBA season. They weren't trying to replace the WNBA in the American sports landscape. A player going to Russia in the off-season didn't threaten the WNBA's existence. But if Unrivaled or Project B becomes successful enough, if they start pulling players away from WNBA commitments, if they start competing for the same television deals and sponsorships, then suddenly you've got a real problem. And that's before we even get to the activism angle. When Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier talk about Unrivaled, they frame it as giving players what they deserve, creating equity, building something for women's basketball. Those are social justice talking points. But the second you start a competing league while serving as union leadership for the existing league, you're not fighting for equity anymore. You're fighting for your own business interests. And there's nothing wrong with business interests, but call it what it is.
To capitalize on endorsements, which now is a real player for these players.
Yeah.
But being able to capitalize on endorsements, a lot of these contracts, now it's not that you can't create a new type of contract, but I know my shoe deal, I had to play in the WNBA to get my money. So a lot of the ecosystem that we live in as Americans playing in the WNBA revolves around playing in America.
Yeah.
And so I just think that
it's the center of the universe for sure.
And another thing that gets lost, like if there's not a league, if we be dramatic.
She's trying so hard not to say it directly. What sometimes gets lost in this conversation when people talk about what's this player going to do or what would that player do, what gets lost when it comes to the WNBA is playing in America. That's the most diplomatic way possible to say, these alternative leagues don't offer what the WNBA offers. And players who jump ship are making a short-term financial decision that could hurt their long-term brand value. And she's probably right about that for most players. If you're not Breanna Stewart or Napheesa Collier, if you're not an owner with equity in these leagues, then you're making a gamble. You're betting that Project B or Unrivaled will be stable, will deliver on their promised salaries, will provide the platform and exposure you need to maintain your endorsement deals. That's not guaranteed. The WNBA, for all its salary problems, is stable. It's backed by the NBA. It's not going anywhere. But here's what Sue Bird can't say out loud. For the players who do have equity, who are founders and owners, this is a completely different calculation. Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier aren't just getting player salaries from Unrivaled, they own the league. If it succeeds, they could make generational wealth. That's worth the risk. That's worth potentially damaging the WNBA. And that's why having them as union leadership creates such an impossible conflict.
Do Americans care about what's happening overseas? I don't know. That would be a...
Not really.
You know, I guess...
Not really.
Hopefully we never have to find out. But
No.
the other thing that I don't think gets talked about enough when it comes to people trying to guess what players would do. First of all, it's such an individual decision based on your finances, based on your life, where you are, how old you are, all the things. But second of all is, you know, to piggyback off the building a brand, like you want to play in the best league against the best players and feel valued. And speaking for somebody that played in Russia, yeah, we played in EuroLeague and there was stakes to those EuroLeague games. There was also a lot of really bad Russian league games that we had to play in. And it can be mind-numbing. And nobody knows. Some of those EuroLeague games, by the way, are some of the best ever. I say this often.
Yeah.
That nobody got to see.
Nobody knows. She just said it. Nobody knows what happened in those EuroLeague games. And that's the entire point. You can be the best player in the world. You can have the greatest performances of your career. But if nobody's watching, if there's no media coverage, if American sponsors don't tear, then it doesn't translate to anything beyond your salary for that specific game. This is the WNBA's actual value proposition, and it's something the league has never properly articulated. It's not just about the salary, it's about the platform. Caitlin Clark makes more from her Nike deal than she'll make in WNBA salary for the next 5 years. Angel Reese's endorsement portfolio is worth millions. That doesn't happen if they're playing in Europe. Even if European leagues paid better, it happens because they're playing in the WNBA in American markets, on American television, where American brands can activate around them. But here's the problem with that argument. It only works if the WNBA maintains its monopoly on elite women's basketball. In America, the moment Unrivaled or Project B can offer comparable exposure plus better salaries, that entire value proposition collapses. And that's what's happening right now. These leagues are betting they can provide enough exposure, enough media coverage, enough sponsor interest to make up for not being the WNBA. And they're backed by serious money that believes that bet will pay off.
And, you know, to like make the point in a really dumb way, I don't know that you win an ESPY for what you did in EuroLeague.
Exactly. We not like people like EuroLeague. That's cool. That's cool. If Caitlin watching, people gonna be tapped in. But outside of that, like, yeah, people ain't gonna be. Come on, man. Stop playing games. Stop playing games, man. Sue Bird called a few things out here, man. Get down in the comments. Let me know what y'all think about this.
You don't win an ESPN for what you did in EuroLeague. That line right there encapsulates everything. The awards, the recognition, the legacy, it all comes from the WNBA. And Sue Bird's right about that. But what she's dancing around is the question players are now asking. Does that matter if you're not getting paid fairly? Because here's the reality check. Caitlin Clark is going to be famous regardless of where she played. If she decided to skip the WNBA entirely and only play in Unrivaled, would Nike drop her? Would State Farm cancel her endorsements? Probably not, because her value comes from who she is, not which league she plays in. Now, would that be true for the 50th best player in the WNBA? No. For most players, the WNBA platform is essential. But for the absolute superstars, for the players who are big enough to transcend the league, the calculation is different. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous for the WNBA. The league has always relied on the fact that players had no alternative. You either played in the WNBA or you went overseas where nobody watched. But now there are alternatives in America, with American media coverage backed by investors who are willing to pay more than the WNBA pays. So the WNBA's leverage is disappearing exactly when they need it most. Nneka Ogwumike, signing with Project B while serving as Players Association President, is the perfect symbol of this crisis. She's supposed to be negotiating for better WNBA contracts, but she just signed with a competing league. What message does that send? It says, I don't believe the WNBA is going to pay me what I'm worth, so I'm going somewhere that will. And if the president of the union doesn't believe in the WNBA's future, why should anyone else? Sue Bird sees all of this. You can tell from how carefully she's choosing her words, how she keeps trying to defend the WNBA's value while acknowledging that players follow the money. She knows this is a crisis. She knows the conflict of interest is real. She knows that having union leadership running rival leagues is an impossible situation, but she also knows that directly criticizing Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier, her peers and friends, would create a firestorm. So instead, she's letting the facts speak for themselves. Whatever is paying you the most is what you're going to talk nice about. That was the key line from the beginning, and it's the key line now. These players aren't loyal to the WNBA. They're not loyal to some broader mission of growing women's basketball. They're loyal to whoever cuts the biggest check. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Professional athletes should maximize their earnings. But you can't have it both ways. You can't position yourself as a leader fighting for the collective good of WNBA players, while simultaneously building a competing business that benefits from the WNBA's limitations. The CBA negotiations are going to be fascinating to watch. How does Nneka Ogwumike negotiate for better WNBA salaries, when she's already publicly demonstrated she doesn't think those salaries will be good enough? How do Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier advocate for WNBA players when they need some level of WNBA dissatisfaction to make Unrivaled attractive? The conflicts are baked into the structure now, and there's no clean way to resolve them. And here's what nobody's talking about yet. What happens if the WNBA calls their bluff? What if the league says, you want to run competing leagues? Fine. But you can't be union leadership while doing it. Choose. Would Stewart and Collier step down from the Players Association? Would Ogwumike give up her presidency? Or would they choose their ownership stakes over their union roles? My guess? They choose the ownership. Because Sue Bird already told us the answer. Players go where the money is. And for Stewart and Collier, the real money isn't in WNBA salaries or even Unrivaled player contracts. It's in owning a successful league. If Unrivaled works, if it becomes a legitimate competitor to the WNBA, they could sell their stakes for tens of millions of dollars. That's what this is really about. So when Sue Bird says these players have no loyalty, when she points out they'll talk nice about whoever pays them most, when she calls Unrivaled and Project B rival leagues, she's not speculating. She's describing exactly what's happening. The WNBA is facing an existential threat, and that threat is being led by its own union leadership. It's the most bizarre conflict of interest in professional sports. And somehow everyone's just pretending it's normal. The question is, what are WNBA players who aren't founders, who don't have equity, who are just trying to get fair contracts? What are they supposed to think about all this? Do they trust union leadership that's literally running competing businesses? Do they believe the Players Association is fighting for the best possible WNBA deal when the association's president just signed with Project B? This is the conversation the WNBA needs to have publicly, but nobody wants to be the one to start it. Nobody except Sue Bird, apparently, who just put it all out there in the most diplomatic way possible while still making the point crystal clear. And now we'll see if anyone has the courage to actually address it, or if everyone just keeps pretending there's no conflict while the league's future hangs in the balance. So what do you think? Is Sue Bird right to call this out? Should Nneka Ogwumike step down as Players Association President? Can Breanna Stewart and Napheesa Collier really serve players' interests while running a competing league? Drop your thoughts in the comments and let me know if you think the WNBA is handling this correctly.